Zigbee is great, and it's my favorite smart home protocol, which I use all throughout my house with Home Assistant and Zigbee2MQTT. But it gets really annoying when one of your devices stops working. You usually don't even know if a device is offline until it stops working. One day the lights just don't automatically turn on like they normally do, and I have to turn them on manually with a switch using my hands like some sort of caveman. It's very frustrating. There are many reasons why a Zigbee device might go offline. Perhaps the battery in it is discharged, or it's dropped off the Zigbee network and needs to be repaired. There are many steps you can take to improve your Zigbee network reliability, and I've made an entire video about this before, which you can find on my channel. But despite all your best intentions, there will still be a day when a device disappears from the network. I needed to find a way to know when a Zigbee device was no longer contactable or available so that I could fix it before it became an annoying problem. I did some research on this and discovered that Zigbee2MQTT has a feature called device availability, which checks the status of each of your Zigbee devices to see if they're online. Active devices, which are Zigbee routers and mains-powered devices, are pinged if they do not check in after a certain period of time. If a device doesn't respond to a set of pings, that device is marked as offline. Passive devices, which are usually battery-powered end devices, get marked as offline if they don't check in or send data to Zigbee2MQTT within a certain time period. These passive devices are usually asleep to save battery power when they're not transmitting data, so they can't be pinged like an active device. Device availability is not turned on by default, so you'll need to do that either via the Zigbee2MQTT user interface or via the configuration file. In the user interface, you can go to Settings and then Availability. I chose Advanced and then set the active device timeout to 20 minutes and left the passive one to 1500 minutes, which is 25 hours. I have over 100 Zigbee devices in my network, so the default 10-minute availability timeout seemed a bit excessive. I didn't need Zigbee2MQTT pinging all the devices I have every 10 minutes and flooding the already limited network bandwidth. 20 minutes has been working totally fine in my environment. The 25-hour default seemed to work fine for my passive devices. Most battery-powered devices in my home seem to check in at least once a day, but there have been times when I'm on holiday and not walking past a motion sensor in my house for a few days that those get marked offline even though they're fine. They come back online again automatically when I get back from holiday and trigger the sensor. I also enabled the last seen attribute in Zigbee2MQTT in Settings and Advanced and in the ISO 8601 format so that I can see when the device is last checked in. You can do all of this in the YAML configuration file as well if you want to, and I've put instructions for that, and in fact, all of the information that you see in this video into an article on my Home Automation Guy website, which you can find linked in the description below. That way you can set this up in your home if you want to without having to constantly pause and play this video. Once you've turned on these settings, you'll see the device availability and the last seen information in the Zigbee2MQTT user interface. I could come in here now at any time and check if any devices are offline or disconnected, and then go and fix them. But that isn't very automated though, is it? I'm not going to go and regularly open up that screen and take a look to see if anything's offline. I needed to find a way to automatically notify me about the offline devices using, automations. It turns out that this last seen information gets pushed into Home Assistant as well, and you should see that your Zigbee devices now have a last seen attribute attached to them. This attribute is disabled by default, and you'll have to enable it manually for each Zigbee device in the Home Assistant UI in order to use it. Or you can add some extra lines to the Zigbee2MQTT YAML configuration file, like this, which will enable this on all of your Zigbee devices inside Home Assistant by default. Once again, you can find these instructions in the article on my Home Automation Go website. Now that Home Assistant knows when a device was last seen, we can start on our automation. Thankfully, a smart person called Mr. Groch, has created a Home Assistant blueprint that can send you a push notification with a list of any offline devices. At a time that you specify, this blueprint will check the last seen information of all your Zigbee devices, and if they haven't checked in for a while, it will send you a notification to your Home Assistant mobile app or any other notifier that you've got set up. I've linked to the blueprint in my article, and you can go from there to import the blueprint and set up an automation from it. I've got mine set up to check every day at 8 PM if any devices have not been seen for 12 hours. I use this option here to exclude a few Zigbee devices from the check because they get powered off when I'm not in the room, so I'm okay with them being offline. And in the Action section, I've configured it to use the Notify service so that a list of any offline devices gets sent to my Pixel 6 phone as a push notification via the Home Assistant app. I can then go and check out why they're offline and replace any batteries or repair them if necessary. But if a device goes offline at 8:30 p.m, I won't know about it for a whole nother day. And if I was out and about or busy at 8 p.m, then I'd inevitably forget about it and hope to be reminded the next day. I was sure I could do better. How could I get told that a device went offline as soon as it happened so I could go fix it right away or save it for later? As a starting point, I hacked apart Mr. Grosh's blueprint to understand how it worked, and then I created a template sensor by repurposing their code which shows all the devices that are currently offline. To create a template sensor, go to Home Assistant's settings page and then to Helpers. Create a helper, which is a template sensor. Give it a name, and then paste this code into the state template area. You can find this code on the Home Automation Guy article, and I've linked to that in the description below. You should see a preview of the sensor at the bottom of the dialog box, listing out any devices that are currently offline, or ones that have not been seen for over 24 hours. It'll be blank if you don't currently have any offline devices. The code looks complicated, but it does some pretty simple things. It goes through every single sensor in your Home Assistant and looks for the ones that have a last seen attribute and are marked as unavailable, or where the last seen time is over 24 hours old. If a device meets those requirements, it adds the name of that device and the time it was last seen to a list. And at the end here, it joins that list together, separating out any of the devices that are offline with a comma so you can more easily read it. Once you've saved this template sensor, you could add it to a Home Assistant dashboard and it will constantly update with any devices that are currently offline. Or you can use it in an automation to send you a push notification when the status of this template sensor changes. To do this, you create an automation with a state trigger that triggers when the template sensor you just created goes from one state to another state. That happens when a new offline Zigbee device name is added to the template sensor list, or when a device comes back online and is removed from the list. I then use the same Home Assistant notification service as the blueprint to send a push notification to my Pixel 6 smartphone listing out all the devices that are offline. This notification gets sent out each time a device goes offline so I can go sort it out, and it gets sent again when the device comes back online so I know that it's been fixed. I now have two ways that Home Assistant can tell me if a Zigbee device in Zigbee2MQTT is offline or not, and I can either go and choose to fix it immediately when one goes offline, or if I'm busy, it will remind me at 8 p.m. via the blueprint of all the devices that are offline so I can go and sort it out then. Using this, I've been able to mostly avoid only finding out that a device is unavailable when the lights don't turn on automatically or some other automation fails to run. Or worse, if that happens to my partner and she comes to tell me that the smart home is all dumb again. If you found this video useful, then please subscribe to the channel. If you're feeling particularly generous, you could give me a super thanks or a PayPal donation, which helps me fund the experiments that I do on this channel and to test out new smart home automations and tech for you all. I regularly release videos like this about my smart home and automations in general. By subscribing to the channel, you'll know when I've released a new video, and then together we can make your home smarter.